Many years ago, after the release of Skyrim all the way back in 2011, I was craving a new RPG to fill that void after doing all the content it had to offer. One of my best friends suggested that I play this little game called Morrowind. I didn't know much about Morrowind other than it being the game that came before Oblivion. He told me how incredible it was and that if I liked Skyrim, I would like Morrowind. I was hesitant at first, but eventually caved and got the Game of the Year edition. I booted the game up, stepped off the boat into Seyda, and I hated it. My original experience I had found to be frustrating and confusing, dying multiple times outside the starting town to enemies that, in my Oblivion and Skyrim knowledge, should have been weak, like mud crabs. But here I was being decimated by them. I was so put off by the experience that I stopped playing only a short time after reaching Balmora. But after finishing the Oblivion remaster that released back in April, I was craving more Elder Scrolls, and my chat recommended that I give Morrowind a try. I was hesitant at first because I instantly recalled my prior experience back in 2011 with the game, but I thought, hey, maybe this is a good opportunity to give Morrowind another shot. I installed a few mods, mostly to add a little bit more textures and modern monitor resolutions, but other than that, I left the game completely vanilla so that I could get that true Morrowind experience. After that, we booted the game, stepped into Vardenfell, and after exploring shore to shore, city to city, and to the top of Red Mountain, I now understand why this is not just one of the greatest games in the Elder Scrolls series, but one of the greatest games ever made. Now, if you clicked on this video, chances are you've played and love Morrowind, but just in case you are one of the few rare people that hasn't heard of Morrowind, let me introduce you. Morrowind was the predecessor to Elder Scrolls Oblivion, released in 2002 for PC and the original Xbox. It takes place on the island of Vardenfell located in the province of Morrowind, which is on the eastern shores of Tamriel. The story of Morrowind sees you working with the Blades, an organization of Imperial agents who see to the Empire's interest across all of Tamriel, until you learn that you are potentially the reincarnation of a legendary figure from the history of Morrowind. This realization leads you down a path of discovery, treachery, and growth as you seek out the truth, learn what happened to your former incarnation, and gain knowledge and skills to fulfill the prophecy. If you have played Skyrim and Oblivion, one of the bigger aspects of Morrowind is it focuses on role-playing. Dialogue was generally not voiced outside of a few characters, therefore leading to greater variety and choices in conversation. Along with more rich dialogue, player skills and their levels played a much more significant role in the kind of character you were. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. I am a goth elf, and today I wanted to say that I was wrong about Morrowind, and here is the reasons why. First up is combat. Now, for those unfamiliar with Morrowind, combat is based on what is essentially a dice roll that takes into account your proficiency in a particular skill, such as marksman, longblade, or even magic, along with your current remaining stamina. When you attack an enemy, the game then does some calculations in the background to determine if you hit that enemy. This is probably explained somewhere in the game, but I did not know this is how it worked, for longer than I care to admit. In fact, I would die again multiple times before reaching Balmora because I was running around like a madman, always out of stamina. Therefore, I couldn't hit anything with my bow, my magic, or a spear. But once I learned about this mechanic, I began to take breaks and walk to allow my player time to recover stamina so I could be prepared for the next Quama that would pick a fight with me. At first, this didn't seem fun. And maybe that's the point, because it encouraged me to focus on a specific stat increase instead of trying to be a jack of all trades early on, which shaped me into a spear-wielding skooma cat. Getting better with a single weapon felt good, and the dopamine rush of landing multiple hits back-to-back felt amazing after spending so much time missing. Once I started becoming more proficient in weapons and landing more hits, I learned about the need to move in specific directions, because all weapons have different attack types. It's not Skyrim where you just left-click and attack. For instance, spears are really good at the stabbing, so you need to move backward or forward to do a stab attack. If you move left to right, or even stand still, you will either swing with the weapon or do a chop attack, which does less damage. This made combat feel more challenging, but also rewarding once I learned how to move better, to make sure I was using the correct attacks and being efficient about it. Combat went from being something I hated to something I enjoyed significantly, even more so than combat in Oblivion or Skyrim, because I actually had to pay attention to my movement, my stamina, and my surroundings, which all lent to a more engaging experience. And speaking of surroundings, that leads me into my next point. The world is deadly. While wandering Cyrodiil or Skyrim, You may suffer the occasional attack from some bandits or wild animals, but I can for the most part say I never felt in true danger in those games wandering from city to city. It was more like a scenic walk with the occasional detour to stomp on some enemies. Morrowind is the complete opposite, and I kind of love it. Everything in Vardenfell wants to kill you. You can rarely make it one whole minute without something trying to attack you, and early on, that can be a real challenge. A simple quest to go to the next town and deliver an item can instead turn into survival in the Elder Scrolls equivalent of the Australian outback. Except instead of snakes and spiders, there's giant lizards, squidmen, and these pterodactyl assholes. Oh, and yeah, there's lava everywhere. Even when you try to stop and rest, there's a good chance one of these Dark Brotherhood bastards are going to show up calling you an Enwa while trying to shank you. And if you survive all that, chances are you have a handful of diseases that massively reduce your stats, which can lead to the inability to carry much weight or run more than 10 feet before being out of stamina. This danger makes the world feel so much more alive, and it's more enjoyable to explore because it puts a huge emphasis on using non-combat skills for one important thing: preparation. In Skyrim and Oblivion, I seldom use potions or scrolls, and repairing gear is often an afterthought. Stops in towns are often no more than a chance to sell all your loot before you head back out. But in Morrowind, because the world is so deadly, you have to be prepared for a multitude of situations. You also just can't fast travel from anywhere back to town, so you have to be able to make it back to town, and there is a lot of things that can stop you from doing that. So every time you make it back to town, you actually have to think about the supplies before you head back out. Do I have enough hammers to repair my gear if it breaks? Do I have potions? Do I have potions to cure diseases? In Morrowind, I found myself using potions and scrolls constantly, whereas in Skyrim, I would hoard potions until a dire situation, but I would never justify a situation being dire enough to use the health potions I got back in Helgen. But potions are expensive, so I found myself looking for more ingredients so that I could craft my own and save some coin. But as I leveled up and got further into the game, I came across more status effects and issues I might need to be prepared for. One such being the drain effect. For the Morrowind vets, I'm sure this is a classic experience that you know to plan for, but I didn't experience this until I was deep into a dungeon, loaded up with loot. I was ready to leave, fought one last enemy, and saw the "you are over encumbered," and thought to myself, I was fine a second ago, what changed? Only to realize the enemy drained all of my strength. And no, it doesn't just come back on its own. You either have to go to a shrine, have a potion, or have magic to restore it with, which I had none of those. So this leads me down the magic spell creation to make spells to restore my attributes in situations like this. The multitude of situations you can find yourself in that require you to be prepared made exploration more challenging, but incredibly enjoyable. It felt like a true adventure where towns served more purposes than just a place to dump my loot. I found myself checking every shop, learning what they sold, seeing if there was a new spell or an item that would be useful, and restocking unnecessary consumables before I set back out on my adventure. And going through the shops in this game made me realize another aspect that Morrowind does so much better than its sequels: variety. Now, I knew Morrowind had some more weapons and spells prior to starting this playthrough, but I truly didn't realize just how many and how much of a difference these made to the game. For starters, the sheer variety of weapon choices I had was overwhelming, but it also got that part of my brain that loves coming up with builds excited. Going into my first shop just to buy some arrows and seeing the list of weapons was shocking. I really couldn't believe how many weapon varieties existed in this game that aren't present in future titles. Tontos, katanas, spears, quarterstaffs, halberds, crossbows, throwing stars, throwing knives, and so many more. It honestly made me sad thinking about how many of these aren't in Oblivion or Skyrim. And it didn't just stop with weapons. The sheer amount of variety of magic also gave me that same sense of longing when thinking about their absences in future Elder Scroll games. Things like water walking and levitate got so much use in my playthrough. It was also incredible to see how much of this game required levitate. As I started to use this spell, I started to see how much of the game was designed around it. From the lack of stairs in Telvanni Towers, to seeing how many places had hidden treasures high above everything that you could only get to with levitate. And don't get me wrong, I love exploring dungeons in Skyrim and Oblivion, but having to think about navigation with verticality via levitate made world and dungeon exploration all the more enjoyable. And this wasn't even the only thing that Morrowind did better. So let's talk about exploration in Morrowind. Perhaps one of my favorite aspects of Morrowind was the exploration. As someone who grew up on Oblivion and Skyrim, I'm used to having a quest journal that tracks all aspects of quests, along with maps getting marked with exactly where I'm going. So I was surprised to say the least when I realized my journal is just that. A journal that gives me a tiny summary of objectives. And they aren't grouped by quest, but rather just when I spoke to someone. And your map rarely gets marked with objectives. Rather, NPCs will give you directions, such as go south of Balmora till you see this bridge, then follow it to the fork, then travel east. I found I needed to write some of these down because they wouldn't get added into my journal. It made quests feel more impactful and enjoyable, even if at their core they were just fetch quests. I think this is something more games should do in general instead of just relying on compasses that provide precise locations of unexplored landmarks. It can turn a boring quest into a very fun one because you actually have to navigate and it feels like an adventure. And the world of Vardenfell feels so alien, which makes adventuring all the more interesting. Skyrim has medieval Scandinavian vibes, Oblivion has that Arthurian knights and castle vibe, but Morrowind feels just like another planet. There is giant mushrooms, grotesque creatures resembling giant insects, barren volcanic wastelands swept with windstorms that actively make you walk slower, and diseased creatures that look more akin to a clicker from The Last of Us than anything else I've seen in an Elder Scrolls game before. It's truly a unique game to explore, and I can't say there's anything that feels quite the same, with maybe the closest thing being the Shivering Isles or the Morrowind expansion in the Elder Scrolls Online. And the setting lends even more to the incredible story that unfolds here, which I have to talk about next. I enjoyed Oblivion, Skyrim, and Elder Scrolls Online stories, but I was not prepared for how good the story in Morrowind was, and I haven't even touched the Blood Moon and Tribunal expansions yet. Not only was the plot incredibly well written and helped flesh out the world around you, but there was so much of it too that just takes you through a multitude of other content. From simply going to help out a contact, to joining the great houses and doing favors for people like Uncle Crassius, it felt like there was so much variety that I did not expect in an Elder Scrolls game. Oblivion and Skyrim's main stories are both fairly short, so that was my expectation. But seeing the main story take up a large majority of my current playthrough was a welcome surprise. The dialogue was also significantly better, given along with some of the lore books you find actually containing more than a few pages at size 30 font, which was exciting to find and actually got me reading more items in the open world. It was such a refreshing experience to have the main story take more than a handful of hours, and its impact on the world after the conclusion felt more impactful than any other Bethesda title. And this was just the main story. For my current progress and other questlines, they seem to have just as much effort and plot put into them, and I'm so excited to work through all the guilds, great houses, and expansions. There's so much more I could speak on about Morrowind, and the things it does better than its sequels, but all in all, I'm very glad that I can sit here today and tell you that I was wrong about this game, and that I am so glad that I gave it the attention it deserves, and I truly understand why so many people speak so fondly of it, not as just the best Elder Scrolls game, but one of the best games of all time. For a game of its age, it did so many things so well, and it raised the bar on what a sandbox RPG could be. Despite being over 20 years old, this game has been one of my most enjoyed games of the year, and I can't wait to see what else it has to offer me with the expansions and the extensive library of mods. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, maybe consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel so you can be notified about all new content in the future. As well, if you are interested in my Morrowind playthrough, feel free to check out my shameless plug to my VOD channel, A Goth Elf Plays, or if you want to catch me on one of my live streams, I usually stream over on Twitch weekdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, check out the link in the video's description. Thank you.